The air inside the historic New York church was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses and old money. Sunlight, filtered through the towering stained glass windows, cast ethereal patterns on the marble floors, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the hallowed space. Crystal chandeliers, dripping with light, hung above the pews where the city's elite sat in their tailored suits and designer gowns, a sea of muted, expensive colors. The murmurs were low and polite, the sound of business deals and social calendars being discreetly arranged. It was the society wedding of the year, a flawless spectacle of wealth and influence. But beneath the veneer of sacred celebration, there was a palpable coldness, the quiet hum of a transaction being finalized. The perfection was almost suffocating, a beautiful, fragile shell waiting for a single, resonant crack to shatter the whole illusion. At the altar stood Julian Thorne, a man sculpted by success and ambition. His custom-tailored tuxedo fit him like a second skin. His posture was impeccable, and a practiced, easy smile was fixed on his face for the photographers. At 42, he was a titan of real estate, a builder of skylines, the very embodiment of the American dream. He was everything a man in his position was supposed to be: powerful, respected, and about to merge his empire with another through this strategically perfect marriage. Yet his eyes told a different story. They were distant, holding a profound emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. He felt like an actor playing the lead role in a life he hadn't written, reciting lines that society had handed him. Fatherhood was a terrifying, abstract concept, a ghost from his own past he had long since buried. Just as the minister's voice echoed, asking if any person present knew of a reason why this couple should not be joined, the great oak doors at the back of the cathedral swung open with a dramatic groan. A collective, quiet gasp rippled through the pews. There, silhouetted against the bright city light, stood a woman in a vibrant red dress, a slash of defiant color in a world of pale whites and somber blacks. It was Claire Evans, his former personal assistant. She held a small bundle in her arms, and with a resolve that seemed to push back against the weight of 1,000 judging eyes, she began to walk down the long aisle. The only sound was the steady, determined click of her heels on the marble, an audacious rhythm that silenced every whisper and drew every gaze. She wasn't running, she was marching, a woman on a mission. She stopped just before the altar, her gaze locked on Julian, ignoring the horrified stare of his bride. Her own expression was a fragile mix of fear and unyielding strength. In her arms, a 9-month-old baby with wide, curious eyes blinked, oblivious to the storm she was about to unleash. Claire took a deep breath, and her voice, though trembling, carried with shocking clarity through the cavernous silence. "Julian, you can't get married." She lifted the baby just enough for him and the world to see. "Because this," she declared, her words a hammer blow to the perfect glass facade, "is Lily, your daughter." The silence shattered, replaced by a wave of scandalized murmurs. It was a single moment that exposed a raw, hidden truth, the kind of story that reminds you life rarely follows a script. Sharing these powerful human moments is why we do this, and your subscription helps us continue to find them. The world outside the church was a storm of flashing lights and shouted questions. Julian shielded Claire and the baby with his body, his hand firmly on her back, guiding them through the chaos toward his waiting car. The sharp clicks of camera shutters sounded like a hailstorm against the bulletproof glass as his driver pulled away from the curb, leaving the opulent wedding and his former life shrinking in the rearview mirror. He didn't look back once. His entire universe had just been condensed into the two people beside him. Claire was trembling, her face pale, while Lily, nestled against her mother's chest, simply stared at the blur of city lights with wide, innocent eyes. The silence inside the car was heavier than any of the noise they had left behind. filled with years of unspoken words and the terrifying uncertainty of what came next. They arrived not at his sterile, glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city, but at a quiet, secure hotel suite he kept for emergencies. It was a place of anonymity, a stark contrast to the life of public scrutiny he had so carefully curated. Claire gently laid a now sleeping Lily in a makeshift crib, her movements fluid and practiced. For the first time since she had walked down that aisle, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound exhaustion. She looked around the impersonal room at the man who was both a stranger and the most familiar person she had ever known. The weight of her decision settled upon her. The understanding that she had not just interrupted a wedding, but detonated a bomb in the center of both their lives, and the fallout was only just beginning to rain down. Julian watched her, a storm of his own raging inside him. He saw not an assistant or an accuser, but the woman he had once shared quiet laughter with during late nights at the office, the only person who had ever seen the cracks in his perfect facade. And in Lily, he saw the terrifying ghost of his own past. He remembered his own father, a man who existed only in a single faded photograph, a phantom who had walked away without a word. The fear of becoming that man, of perpetuating that cycle of abandonment, had been a cold, constant companion his entire life. It was the reason he built walls of concrete and steel around his heart, believing that if he never truly let anyone in, he could never fail them. He finally broke the silence, his voice raspy with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me, Claire? Why did you wait so long?" He wasn't angry, only filled with a deep, aching regret for the months he had lost. She turned from the crib, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Because I knew how this world works, Julian. I'd be the gold-digging secretary, the homewrecker. I'd be a story, not a person. And Lily, I didn't want her to be a scandal. I wanted her to be your daughter. But I was terrified you'd see her as a liability, another problem for your lawyers to handle." Her voice broke on the last words, revealing the depth of her solitude and the pain of her lonely struggle. The next morning, the legal tempest hit. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from his board of directors, his furious parents, and his lawyers, all echoing the same message. He had committed career suicide. The bride's family, a powerful dynasty in their own right, filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for breach of contract and public humiliation. Their legal team immediately leaking the story to the press. The headlines were brutal, painting him as a reckless philanderer and Claire as a conniving opportunist. His perfectly constructed empire of respectability crumbled overnight, leaving him exposed and besieged from all sides. The world can be a brutal court of opinion, and it's in sharing these raw, unfiltered struggles that we find our shared humanity. Your support allows us to keep telling these important stories. Ignoring the cacophony, Julian focused on the small world within the hotel suite. He watched Claire feed Lily, his heart clenching at the simple, beautiful intimacy of the scene. He asked if he could try, and she hesitantly handed him the bottle. His large, capable hands, so used to signing billion-dollar contracts and shaking on deals, were clumsy and awkward as he held his daughter. Lily looked up at him with her curious eyes, her tiny hand wrapping around one of his fingers. In that moment, the lawsuits, the headlines, and the angry phone calls all faded into meaningless noise. For the first time, he felt the pull of a connection that had nothing to do with power or wealth, a fragile, terrifying, and profoundly real bond. Claire watched him, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine awe as he looked at their daughter. It was the same look she remembered from stolen moments in his office, a glimpse of the man beneath the tycoon. But she also remembered his distance, the walls he built, the life he had chosen that had no room for them. She had spent 9 months preparing for rejection, steeling herself to raise Lily alone. Trusting him now felt like stepping off a cliff. hoping he would catch her when he had already let her fall once before. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach, a constant whisper that this was just a fleeting moment of conscience, not a permanent change of heart. Their isolation was shattered a few days later when they attempted to go for a short walk in a private garden. A pack of paparazzi descended on them, their cameras flashing like weapons. They shouted cruel questions at Claire, their lenses intruding on Lily's personal space, causing the baby to cry in fear. Julian quickly bundled them back inside, his face a mask of cold fury. Later that evening, he saw the photos online, splashed across tabloid websites with vile headlines. He saw the fear in Claire's eyes and the tears on his daughter's face, captured and sold for public consumption. He realized then that his money and power, which had always been his shield, were useless in protecting them from this kind of violation. That night, as the city slept, Julian sat by the window, watching the distant, silent lights of the skyscrapers he had helped build. They looked cold and empty, monuments to a life that now felt utterly meaningless. He had spent his entire existence running from the ghost of his father, only to realize he had been heading in the same direction. He had been absent, not physically, but emotionally. He had allowed fear to dictate his choices, to keep him from the one thing that truly mattered. A quiet resolve settled over him, a shift in the very foundation of his being. He would not be his father. He would not let fear win. It's in these quiet moments of decision that a person's true character is forged. We are so grateful you are here with us to witness these journeys, and every subscription is a promise that more stories like this will be heard. He walked over to where Claire was sitting, her expression weary and guarded. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I know I don't deserve your trust, Claire. I know I've been a coward. For years, I've been building a life I thought I was supposed to want, and it almost cost me everything. It almost cost me you and Lily." His voice was low and steady, stripped of all its usual corporate authority. "I can't erase the past, but I can build a new future. Our future. I'm not that man at the altar anymore. I promise you I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you and to our daughter." His words hung in the air, a vow far more sacred than the one he was supposed to make in the church. Claire looked into his eyes and saw not a tycoon making a deal, but a man making a pledge. Before she could respond, a sharp knock echoed at the door. It was a courier, delivering a thick legal envelope. Julian opened it, his face hardening as he read the contents. The ex-fiancé's family had escalated their attack. They had filed a motion with the family court, seeking to prove he was an unstable and unfit parent, using the scandal as leverage. They were not just coming for his money, they were coming for his daughter. The battle had just begun, but now it was no longer about a broken engagement or a business merger. It was about a family. Julian looked from the legal documents to Claire, who was holding Lily tightly, her expression a mixture of fear and newfound resolve. He saw his reason to fight, his reason to become the man he was always meant to be. He folded the document and placed it on the table. He was no longer just Julian Thorne, the real estate magnate. He was Lily's father, and he would tear down his entire world and rebuild it from scratch, if that's what it took to protect her. The courtroom would be his next battlefield, and his love for his daughter his only weapon. The courtroom was a world away from the hallowed halls of the cathedral. It was a space of cold, impersonal wood and fluorescent lighting that cast a sterile pallor on every face. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and simmering animosity, felt designed to suffocate emotion. Claire sat on the witness stand, her back straight, enduring a relentless assault from the opposing counsel. The lawyer, a man with a surgically precise cruelty, dissected her past, twisting her quiet dignity into calculated ambition. He painted her as a conniving opportunist who had timed her revelation for maximum financial and social damage. Each question was a carefully aimed dart, And though Claire answered with a calm, unwavering voice, Julian could see the immense effort it took. The subtle trembling of her hands as she defended not just herself, but the legitimacy of her daughter's existence in this hostile environment. Then the attack turned to Julian. The lawyer presented a portrait of a man unhinged by a midlife crisis, a reckless tycoon whose impulsive actions proved his instability. The dramatic exit from the wedding, the abandonment of a billion-dollar merger, the sudden embrace of a child he hadn't known. It was all spun into a narrative of profound unfitness. Julian's own lawyers shifted uneasily, ready to counter with legal precedent and character witnesses, but he barely heard their whispered reassurances. His focus was entirely on Claire, on the quiet strength she projected despite the public humiliation. In the back of the courtroom, a trusted friend held a sleeping Lily, a small, innocent soul at the center of this vicious storm. He saw the life he had almost thrown away and the future he was now fighting for, and knew that a legal defense was not what was needed. When his lead counsel rose to begin his defense, Julian placed a firm, steady hand on his arm. "Thank you, but I'll handle this," he said, his voice low but resolute. He stood and walked to the podium alone, dismissing his entire legal team with a simple shake of his head. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. This was a move of either supreme confidence or utter foolishness. He faced the judge, a woman whose stern expression betrayed nothing, and took a deep breath. He wasn't there to argue points of law or present evidence. He was there to lay down his only weapon, the unvarnished truth. He wasn't the powerful CEO of Thorne Development anymore. He was just a man, stripped bare before the law, about to make the most important pitch of his life. "Your Honor," he began, his voice devoid of its usual corporate polish, resonating with a raw honesty that commanded the room's attention. "The opposition is right. My actions were impulsive. They were reckless. For 42 years, I lived a life of careful calculation, of risk assessment and strategic planning. I built an empire of glass and steel, a fortress designed to protect me from one single thing, feeling anything real." He paused, his gaze sweeping over to Claire. "I was a coward. I was so terrified of becoming my father, a man who walked away, that I never allowed myself to get close enough to anything worth staying for. I didn't find out about my daughter 9 months ago. I lost 9 months with her because I had built walls so high I couldn't even see what was right in front of me." His confession hung in the dead air of the courtroom, a stunning admission of fault. He turned his attention back to the judge, his eyes clear and unwavering. "I've spent my entire life building skyscrapers that touch the clouds, but the only thing of value I have ever truly helped create is that little girl sleeping in the back of this room. Being her father isn't a legal obligation I'm here to dispute. It's the only chance I have to finally become a man. You can review my finances. You can question my stability. But the one thing you cannot measure is that I will not fail her. I am not my father," he finished, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't look at the lawyers or the judge anymore. He looked only at Claire, who was now openly weeping, not with sorrow, but with the profound relief of a woman who had just seen the soul of the man she loved finally come home. The judge's gavel came down not with a crack, but with a soft, decisive thud that seemed to absorb all the animosity in the room. The ruling was swift and unequivocal. Custody was not in question. The motion was dismissed, with the judge offering a stern rebuke to the opposing counsel for attempting to weaponize family court for corporate leverage. But the legal victory felt secondary. The true triumph was in the silence that followed, as Julian walked back to his seat and took Claire's hand. Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze, a new vow was made, stronger than any that could be spoken at an altar. It was a silent promise of partnership, of shared struggle, and of a future they would now build together, brick by honest brick. They left the courtroom not as a tycoon and his former assistant, but as a family, with Lily sleeping peacefully in Claire's arms, blissfully unaware of the battle her parents had just won for her. The transformation in Julian's life was as radical as it was profound. The sterile, glass-walled penthouse overlooking a city of strangers was the first thing to go, sold without a moment's hesitation. In its place, he bought a sprawling house in a quiet suburb, a home with a sun-drenched nursery and a wide, green backyard where a swing set now stood waiting. The man who once commanded boardrooms now spent his afternoons on the floor, clumsily assembling toys and learning the rhythm of Lily's laughter. He restructured his role at the company, delegating the day-to-day operations to be a present and active father. He learned to change diapers, to warm bottles in the middle of the night, and to find more joy in a sleepy, milky smile from his daughter than he ever had in closing $1 billion deal. Claire watched it all, her heart slowly mending as she saw his promises manifest not in words, but in 1,000 small, consistent acts of love and devotion. His personal reckoning soon grew into a public mission. Haunted by Claire's lonely struggle and his own near failure as a father, Julian used his immense resources to launch the Lily Foundation. It was an organization dedicated to providing legal aid, financial support, and community resources for single mothers and children whose fathers were not legally recognized. He poured his energy into it, turning the pain of his past into a beacon of hope for others. He wasn't just writing checks. He was in the trenches, using his story to dismantle the same social stigmas that had almost cost him everything. Sharing a story of redemption can change a life, and knowing that so many of you have chosen to join us on this journey gives us the strength to continue bringing these powerful truths to light. His work became a testament to his change, a legacy built not of steel and concrete, but of compassion and second chances. Years from now, no one would remember the scandalous headlines or the broken engagement. The story that would endure was quieter, more meaningful. It would be the story of a man who tore down his own gilded cage to learn how to fly. It would be the story of a woman whose quiet courage saved 2 lives, not just one. And most importantly, it would be the story of Lily, a little girl growing up surrounded by the unconditional love of a father who chose her over an empire and a mother who showed him the way. Their future was an unwritten page, but it was no longer a script handed to them by society. It was a life of their own making, filled with the simple, extraordinary richness of family picnics in the park, bedtime stories, and the certain knowledge that the most valuable thing one can ever build is a home.